So let's center ourselves, taking a deep breath in, always through the nose, retaining that breath, filling your lungs, expanding your rib cage, and then letting go through your mouth. Surrendering. Noticing the stillness that is there before the next in-breath. We can center ourselves very quickly like this, just with one breath. And this particular technique my guides call the perfect sigh. When we take a deep, deep breath in through the nose, and then let it go, we make a sighing sound. And the effect in our body is a letting go and a change of frequency. It brings relaxation. It brings a shift. And this is why the body sometimes spontaneously does a sigh. Sometimes it is a sigh of frustration. Sometimes it is a sigh of pleasure, of letting go. And what the body is doing is feeling and expressing the need for a change from the tension that was there, and releasing the tension. Let's try this once more before we begin our lesson. Breathing deeply in through the nose, filling your lungs. And retaining that with your rib cage expanded for a few seconds. And letting go. Noticing the stillness at the end of the out-breath. And smiling into the sense of peace. Now that we are centered, we'll begin. I want to explain a bit about my journey with the breath. In the beginning of my spiritual journey, I was mostly interested in dynamic concepts and practices. So one of the parts of the beginning of my journey was reading Louise Hay's You Can Heal Your Life, and working with affirmations and that sort of thing. And it was very exciting and it was very dynamic, and my mind was very much involved in this. There was no meditation involved, no pranayama, anything like that. And one of the next things that grabbed my attention was channeling, because I received so much help from going to mediums and psychics and channels for readings. And they became my first real teachers, the first kind of authority figures that I looked up to these invisible guides who had so much more knowledge and wisdom than anyone on the earth that I had ever experienced. I had never experienced that sort of wisdom and expansion of consciousness and ideas and love and encouragement from my parents, from my school teachers, from the church minister, from any friends of mine. I didn't have those figures to look up to in my life that really taught me anything profound. And so I looked to channeling for a way to receive the teachings and the guidance that I needed. And that, once again, was a very dynamic process. Many times along the way, meditation was mentioned, pranayama was mentioned, and I did try to meditate and wasn't successful. And it was so frustrating to me trying to sit quietly and still my thoughts when I had such a very busy mind that I gave up very quickly. And when I then came to channel myself, after teaching myself to channel and going through a long process around that, which I describe in my book, Pleiadian Emissary of the Light, I then started to access a whole lot of different guides, some of whom I was much more interested in than other ones. And what happens when you begin channeling is that you have your focus on one type of guides or certain types of information, and you don't necessarily notice what's coming through along the way. And this very much happened with me. For instance, on the day that I officially started channeling the Pleiadians and received a Pleiadian activation in South Africa in 2007, I simultaneously received a Syrian activation and started channeling a Syrian group. But I wasn't interested in Syrians. Therefore, I just took the name that I was given, which was something like Metatron. I forget the actual name of that first Syrian group. But I didn't pay any attention to them because I was only interested in the Pleiadians. So I was like, oh, okay, here's this other group. Well, yeah, they seem to be teaching me something else, but I didn't identify them as Syrians until at least a year later. One of the things that happened simultaneously with me beginning to channel is when I received the guidance or while I was channeling, I was taught breath techniques and I was asked to do specific things with my breath. And sometimes those things actually happened to me on a physical level. So, for instance, my breath would be emptied from my body and I would notice that I wasn't breathing. And in the moment, it was just something that was happening to me, and what I was paying attention to was the guidance or the words that I was receiving. I was still analyzing from my mind what I was receiving, rather than settling into what was physically happening to me and the lessons that I was being given on the level of breathing and physical posture. So it was some years into my channeling process before I connected from my mind and heart with Babaji. So from my mind, by that I mean I learnt about who he was, I read about him, I was inspired to connect with him, and from my heart came the desire to know more about him and experience his energy. And I then met Babaji because he visited me. And this was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in my life. He came into the room where I was at that time in quite some distress and during a rebirthing session, and actually sang to me. It was obviously an etheric experience in that he wasn't in 3D, but for me, I saw and felt and heard him as if he was in 3D and a real person. It was a really amazing thing. Some years after that, I started to realize that it was because of the overlighting influence of Babaji in my life that I was being given these gifts of breath techniques and posture and ways to expand my consciousness and open my mind and become more receptive and more peaceful and everything that one aspires to be on one's spiritual path through the breath and pranayama techniques that I was being given. And this came through Babaji. I just didn't recognize it was coming through Babaji, who is a master of breath, Kriya and Pranayama, for quite a while. We can be quite dense sometimes, but it's the way it is. Wherever we are focused with our logical mind seems to be where the exciting thing is happening, and sometimes it takes some weeks or months or years to realize what actually was happening and what was the most profound thing at that time. So I followed my guide's instructions to become a meditation teacher, even though I had never experienced or mastered meditation techniques myself. And in this way, the guides were able to teach me, while they were teaching other people, how to use breath in an effective way to open the consciousness. And this is, to date, my greatest joy, passing on breath techniques. And it is very much part of the Stepping into the Light program. There is a certain level of breath awareness and control that is needed in order to master the more advanced techniques that we will use. And we will begin today with a simple, full yogic breath practice. What this means is that you breathe slowly and fully, and it's a very physical activity where you breathe first into your belly and then allow the air to rise up into your lungs. You allow your ribcage to expand. In the third stage, the breath comes right up above the collarbones into the base of your throat. There is some effort involved with that last stage. And then you let go in the reverse order, letting go from your throat and then from your chest and then from your belly. And you can practice this technique sitting up or lying down. It is, in fact, a very good practice for insomnia. It's an excellent thing to do in bed at night when you can't sleep or when you just need to center yourself and ground and relax yourself and get out of your mind in order to sleep more peacefully and healthily. And so we begin.